I saw their tears, and I knew this was not failure. It was a sacred turning point. You see, when the Spirit awakens a soul, the hunger of the heart changes. Love that once felt like fire becomes like ash, unless it is lit again by the presence of God. Relationships lose their charm because the soul has touched eternity, and nothing less can satisfy. When I was a young pastor in Seoul, I would sit in the tiny tent church with just a few believers. They came to me not only for sermons, but for counsel. Again and again, I heard their voices tremble. Pastor, I thought that knowing God would make my marriage sweeter, my friendships deeper, but instead everything feels dry and meaningless. I will share lessons the Lord taught me on Prayer Mountain, where I spent days and nights in tears before Him. I discovered that when God removes shallow attachments, He prepares us for relationships built on eternal purpose, not temporary comfort. In this message, I will guide you through this mystery. We will explore why awakening often leaves relationships feeling empty, how prayer reshapes affection, and why this strange detachment is not loss, but a doorway into deeper love. Stay with me until the end, for together we will uncover how Christ's love restores meaning to every bond, friendships, marriage, even the way we see ourselves. Welcome, dear friend, to Dr. Cho Prayer Secrets. I invite you to walk this journey with us. And if this message blesses you, subscribe and join this family of prayer, faith, and spiritual growth. I remember kneeling alone on the cold floor of my small room long before our church grew. My body was weary, but my heart was more restless than my bones. No matter how much care or affection people gave me, there was still an ache inside, a hunger that no human touch could calm. This is not merely knowledge, it is life, and it can heal the loneliness that follows awakening. In those hours, the Spirit whispered, "David, human desire will wander until it finds rest in me." That day, I understood something many overlook. The soul is eternal, and nothing created can satisfy it fully. When a person awakens to God, they taste this eternal reality. Suddenly, the laughter of friends feels hollow. The embrace of a loved one feels too small, and the words of affection fade like echoes in the air. It is not that love disappears, but that the soul now longs for a deeper source, one that human relationships alone cannot provide. Love without prayer, without the breath of God in it, becomes fragile. It may shine brightly for a moment, but soon it flickers. When awakening comes, the heart begins to see that affection built only on emotions or need cannot last. The Spirit shows us that without divine alignment, love remains incomplete. I often told my congregation that prayer is the cord that binds human desire to heaven. Without that cord, desire drifts restlessly from one person to another, never finding peace. But when prayer draws us into God's presence, desire finds its true home, and even the love we share with others is transformed. When I was a young man, I thought love from another person would heal every wound inside me. I believed that if someone understood me fully or stood by me without leaving, my heart would finally be whole. Many of you may know this longing. It feels natural, almost unavoidable. This is why after awakening, many feel a deep dissatisfaction with ordinary relationships. The soul has touched living water. It cannot return to empty wells. It seeks love anchored in the eternal, love carried on the current of God's Spirit. But as the years passed and I walked with the Spirit, I discovered a deeper truth. The heart of man carries a space so vast, so sacred, that no human presence can fill it. This space belongs only to God. We try to fill it with affection, with recognition, with companionship, but still it remains empty. Only the Spirit can rest there. Only Christ can dwell there fully. When awakening comes, this truth becomes clear. You begin to see that No matter how kind, how loyal, or how loving another person may be, they cannot take the place of God's presence in your soul. This is why even the most beautiful relationships sometimes feel fragile or unsatisfying. The heart is crying out for its true companion. Prayer is the discipline that shifts this dependence. When I prayed through long nights on Prayer Mountain, I discovered that intimacy with God is stronger than human embrace. Prayer speaks to the deepest silence inside, the silence that no conversation can reach. Through prayer, I learned that fulfillment is not found by clinging to others, but by resting in the nearness of the Lord. The Spirit teaches us that earthly love is a gift, but divine love is the foundation. Without the foundation, the gift cannot last. With it, however, every bond becomes stronger, every act of love becomes purer, because it flows not from need, but from the fullness of God dwelling within. There was a season in my life when I felt surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. The church was growing, the meetings were full, but when I returned to my room, silence pressed on me like a heavy stone. In those nights, I asked the Lord, why does my heart still feel empty? Slowly, I came to see that loneliness is not always the absence of people, but the absence of God's nearness. The Spirit began to teach me that such emptiness is not a curse. It is a summons, a gentle knock from heaven. God was calling me deeper, beyond surface prayers, into communion where silence itself becomes a sanctuary. On Prayer Mountain, I watched countless men and women arrive with burdens of loneliness. Some came weeping, some came bitter, others came tired of waiting. Yet after hours of pouring their hearts out before God, a transformation would occur. Their tears would soften, their shoulders would lift, and a new light would enter their eyes. They discovered that emptiness was not punishment but invitation, a call to breathe again through prayer. I often told my congregation that prayer is like breathing. Without it, the soul suffocates. Just as lungs collapse without air, the inner life collapses without prayer. When we are disconnected from the source, even joy feels tasteless, even love feels thin. But when prayer fills the heart, life begins to expand again. The Lord uses loneliness to draw us into intimacy with Him. It is His way of pulling the soul from shallow distractions into the deep waters of His Spirit. When prayer becomes our breath, the emptiness turns into space for God to dwell, and what once felt like isolation becomes communion with the eternal. In my early ministry, I often looked for love as a source of strength. I longed for words of encouragement, for people to stand with me, for someone to assure me I was not alone. But as the years went by, the Spirit began to change this longing. Through prayer, I discovered that love was not something to collect, but something to release. When I prayed for hours each morning, I noticed a new compassion rising inside me. Faces of people would come to mind. Widows, orphans, the sick, those burdened by despair. I would carry them before God in intercession. These prayers were not born from my strength. They were born from His love, filling me until it could not be contained. Awakening transforms the heart in this way. Before, you seek affection as a kind of food. After, you become the vessel through which Christ's love flows. No longer does the believer ask, "Who will care for me?" Instead, the Spirit whispers, "Who will you care for?" The center of love shifts from need to overflow. This is why many awaken and suddenly feel their relationships are pointless. It is not that people no longer matter. It is that the old pattern of taking, needing, and clinging no longer fits the awakened soul. The Spirit is teaching you that relationships are not given to fill your emptiness, but to be channels where God's love can flow outward. When I first began to preach about the fourth dimension, many people looked at me with confusion. They asked, "Pastor, what do you mean by another dimension?" I explained that beyond the physical and the visible lies the realm of the spirit, the place where prayer, faith, and vision shape the course of life. It is in this realm that God's power works, unseen yet undeniable. I often said to my congregation, when you drink deeply from the Holy Spirit, you stop begging for drops from others. Instead, you become a spring that refreshes those around you. This is the great shift from hunger to abundance, from need to service, from craving love to radiating Christ Himself. In my years of ministry, I saw couples deeply in love, friends bound tightly together, families united by affection. But over time, without God at the center, even the strongest ties began to fray. Passion turned cold, loyalty weakened, words once full of promise lost their strength. Why? Because bonds built only on emotion belong to the visible world. They cannot survive when storms come. The fourth dimension teaches us that relationships rooted in prayer are different. Prayer carries the unseen into the seen. When a husband and wife kneel together before God, they are no longer two trying to hold each other up. They are three, bound by the Spirit. When friends share a vision given by God, their bond becomes more than companionship, it becomes covenant. After awakening, the eyes of the heart open to this truth. You see clearly that affection alone is fragile, but faith makes love endure. Spirit-led vision gives direction, and prayer strengthens the bond so that even trials cannot break it. There was a time in my youth when I prayed with great intensity, but if I am honest, many of my prayers carried hidden motives. I prayed for success, for recognition, even for love that would ease my own loneliness. These prayers were not false, but they were still rooted in self. Over the years, the Spirit began to burn those motives away. I often told my congregation that the physical hand may grow tired of holding, but the Spirit's hand never weakens. When relationships are carried into the fourth dimension, they are no longer merely human connections. They become instruments through which God Himself reveals His love and His power to endure. Awakening has this fire within it. When the presence of God grows stronger in your life, lust loses its sweetness, control feels heavy, dependency feels weak, and fear-driven love feels hollow. The heart begins to reject what once seemed desirable. It is as if the Spirit is cleansing the inner chamber, preparing it for something higher. I often said to my congregation, when gold is refined, the fire removes the dross. In the same way, awakening refines the heart. You are not being punished, you are being prepared. In this season, God teaches you to love, not for self, but for His glory, so that your affection reflects truth and not illusion. I learned this during long nights on Prayer Mountain. People would come asking me to intercede for them, for a husband, for a wife, for someone they long to keep close. But as they prayed with tears, the Spirit often shifted their cry. Their voices would soften, and instead of pleading for possession, they would begin to ask for purity, for the grace to love without chains. This is the true work of awakening. It strips away illusion. It shows you that love built on fear or control is not love at all. God allows the burning so that your heart can be purified, so that what remains is real, steady, and rooted in His Spirit. In the early days of our ministry, many who came to church sought prayer for comfort. A husband wanted peace at home. A wife wanted security. Parents wanted their children to behave well. These desires were not wrong, but they were still centered on self. As we prayed together, the Spirit began to reveal something greater. Relationships were never meant only to soothe our hearts. They were given as assignments in God's kingdom. When I prayed with my wife, I began to see her not only as my companion, but as a co-worker chosen by God to carry the vision He placed in me. Our unity was no longer just for our happiness. It was for the gospel. The Spirit taught me that true love finds its highest meaning when it serves destiny, not ego. I remember telling couples on Prayer Mountain that prayer could change their view of each other. Instead of asking, does this person meet my needs? The Spirit leads you to ask, how can we together serve God's purpose? This shift transforms marriage, friendships, even family ties. Suddenly the bond is no longer fragile because it is rooted in mission. When believers awaken, they begin to notice this change. Companionship becomes partnership. Fellowship becomes ministry. Affection becomes fuel for vision. A friend is not just someone to share laughter with, but someone who lifts your arms when you grow weary. A spouse is not just one who comforts, but one who labors beside you in prayer and sacrifice. The Spirit teaches that love anchored in destiny cannot collapse under trials. When the heart moves from seeking comfort to embracing assignment, relationships find new strength. They carry the weight of eternity, and in that weight, they discover their true purpose. There was a season when many couples in my congregation came to me confessing that though they lived under the same roof, they still felt distant. They sought more closeness, but nothing seemed to satisfy. I told them gently, closeness of body cannot replace closeness of spirit. True intimacy begins not in the flesh, but in prayer. On Prayer Mountain, I would spend nights alone, yet I never felt abandoned. In the stillness, I discovered an intimacy stronger than human embrace. I spoke to God as a child speaks to a father, as a friend speaks to a friend. And in return, He poured peace, strength, and love into my heart until it overflowed. This is why I called prayer spiritual breathing. Without it, the soul suffocates, but with it, the soul flourishes. After tasting this dimension, earthly bonds often feel small unless they too are carried into prayer. A marriage rooted only in affection cannot endure, but a marriage sealed by prayer becomes a union of three: husband, wife, and the Spirit of God. Friendships without shared faith may fade, but friendships born in prayer grow eternal roots. When the soul awakens, it begins to thirst for a connection deeper than human words or touch can provide. Prayer is that place. Prayer draws you into the very presence of God, where silence becomes communication and tears become language. In those moments, the soul knows it is fully seen, fully known, fully loved. No human bond, no matter how tender, can compare with this depth. When I was a young believer, I felt torn between two worlds. On one side were friends who laughed with me, who shared meals and stories, but whose hearts were far from God. On the other side were few humble souls who prayed with me through the night, who carried the vision of Christ's kingdom in their hearts. Slowly, the Spirit opened my eyes. One kind of bond entertained me for a moment. The other carried me toward eternity. The awakened soul knows this truth. Intimacy with God is the wellspring. Every other relationship finds meaning only when it draws from that source. Without it, closeness remains shallow. With it, love becomes eternal. Awakening has this effect. It loosens the ties that are shallow, ties built only on habit or convenience. You begin to sense that such connections, though pleasant, cannot walk with you into the deeper things of God. At the same time, the Spirit begins to draw you into a new kind of family, people who burn with the same vision, who pray with the same intensity, who hunger for the same kingdom. I often told my congregation that spiritual family is not chosen by blood or by romance, it is chosen by the Spirit. When you meet such people, there is an immediate recognition, as if your soul has found its brothers and sisters. These bonds are purposeful, not accidental. They form around faith, around prayer, around the shared burden of carrying God's vision forward. On Prayer Mountain, I witnessed strangers who arrived from different nations and cultures. They had nothing in common in the flesh, yet after hours of kneeling together crying out to God, they rose as family. Their unity was not social but spiritual, and it carried the fragrance of eternity. This is the miracle of awakening. It teaches you to treasure bonds that are spirit-led, bonds that do not fade with time because they are written into God's eternal design. There was a time when many came to me and said, "Pastor, I feel no joy in my relationships anymore. I pray, I serve, but still everything feels empty." I would listen quietly and then remind them, love becomes meaningless when it is cut off from its true root. The root is Christ. Without him, even the sweetest bond will wither. With him, even ordinary relationships can shine with eternal light. This is the transformation awakening brings. Relationships shift from being places of need to becoming channels of blessing. A husband and wife praying for their children carry more power than any human plan. Friends who intercede for one another carry each other further than any simple advice. Even family meals, when shared with gratitude to God, become vessels of his presence. I learned this in my own marriage. My wife and I discovered that when we tried to build our closeness on emotion alone, it would rise and fall like the tide. But when we knelt together in prayer, when we opened the word together, our bond deepened in a way no conflict could break. Christ became the center, and suddenly our relationship was not only for us, it became a holy partnership in God's kingdom. On Prayer Mountain, I saw couples arrive broken, ready to separate, but after days of fasting and praying together, they would leave holding hands, tears on their faces, their hearts rerooted in Christ. The love they rediscovered was not shallow affection. It was eternal value, love anchored in the Lord himself. When love is rerooted in Christ, the sense of pointlessness fades. What once felt empty becomes sacred. Every relationship becomes a vessel through which God's Spirit flows, carrying his presence into daily life. My dear friend, the emptiness you feel is not the end of love. It is the beginning of love in its truest form. When the Spirit awakens your heart, he removes the illusions so that only what is eternal will remain. Relationships are no longer places to demand or to cling, but sacred spaces where Christ's love can flow through you. I want you to remember this in your daily walk. Every prayer you lift, every act of compassion you show, every moment of intercession for those around you, these are seeds of eternal love. When Christ is the root, even the smallest gesture becomes holy. May your heart find peace in this truth, and may your days be filled with the quiet joy of knowing you are never alone, for the Lord himself is with you. Do not fear the season of detachment. See it instead as God's invitation to deeper intimacy with him. From that intimacy you will find strength to love others, not from emptiness, but from overflow. And in that overflow, your relationships will be transformed into channels of God's presence and purpose. Thank you for joining me. If this message has blessed you, I invite you to like this video, share it with those who may need it, and subscribe to walk with us in prayer, faith, and spiritual growth. The Lord bless you and keep you in his love.